G'day, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another crazy dose of EV and net zero insanity in MGUY EV news for Sunday the 1st of December 2024. Be sure to follow me on the usual socials for more content, links in the description, and please make sure you're subscribed and have enabled all notifications so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you'd like to support this channel, why not buy me a coffee? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. So this one's quite funny. There's a guy from the UK Climate Change Committee or some rent-seeking organisation that's fully invested in the net zero scare that's claiming that combustion car manufacturers are going to go the way of Blockbuster, the video store that went out of business when streaming services came online. So let's read what he has to say and then I'll explain why this is complete and utter nonsense. Car makers that don't embrace EVs will go the way of Blockbuster, claims climate advisor. Car companies that are slow to switch to electric vehicles will go bust like Blockbuster Video, a government climate advisor has suggested. Dr. James Richardson of the public advisory body the Climate Change Committee said car companies must speed up investment in EV infrastructure or risk being replaced by newer competitors. He told MPs on the Environmental Audit Committee, "We know from previous transitions between technologies that incumbent firms can get left behind. We all remember Blockbuster Video or Kodak. Blockbuster Video, which ran thousands of video rental stores, crashed into bankruptcy in 2010 after failing to adapt to streaming. Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012 after digital cameras and smartphones made film largely redundant." So, have you spotted the obvious difference between EVs and combustion cars and streaming services and videos, or digital cameras and film? Well, if you haven't, I'll tell you. It's because all the subsequent technologies, like streaming services or digital cameras, were better than what came before. Videos and film. Yes, we can argue about whether film is better than digital. I happen to think so in some circumstances, but the reality is that the technology was way better, more convenient. We could have a camera in our pocket on our phone. We could stream music or video on demand instead of having to go down to the shop to rent a video. I mean, obviously the technology that followed it was better. That is not the case with EVs. EVs are worse than internal combustion engine cars. They just are. They're not a better technology. We're being forced to buy EVs by government mandate, not because market forces determine that they are a better product. They aren't. People don't want to buy them unless they're forced to. So rather than ICE cars being Blockbuster, I think EVs are Betamax. So this video is really interesting. This is a guy who I've got an enormous respect for. He's a guy called Mark P. Mills from the National Centre for Energy Analytics. And he's done some really good stuff on the reality of EVs and the carbon footprint of manufacturing batteries, which is ginormous, quite frankly. As you'll hear when you go and watch this video, about 250 tons of earth has to be mined just for one EV battery. And all of that mining obviously has to be done with fossil fuel powered mining equipment, and it has to be transported via fossil fuel powered transporters. It's absolutely astonishing. And in this short video, it's only about 10 minutes, he busts some myths and tells some uncomfortable truths about EVs. I'll just play a couple of extracts because it's a great video, but I highly recommend you go and watch the whole thing at the link in the description.
The essence of the problem is there's a myth about EVs being simpler. That's the essence of the problem. They aren't simpler. They're differently complicated. So, a regular car has a complicated internal combustion engine with hundreds of moving parts and a simple fuel tank with one moving part, the fuel pump. An EV flips that complexity. It has a simple drive system, an electric motor, typically one or two, with one or two moving parts. But its fuel tank, the battery, is enormous. For a typical EV, it weighs 1,000 pounds. It has hundreds, if not thousands of parts. The parts actually move. They just move microscopically. It's chemicals. It has a cooling system, safety systems, power electronics, structural systems. It's a very complicated engine, but it's an electrochemical engine instead of a thermodynamic engine, if you like. So you just swap complexities.
That's a very, very good point. I've been trying to make this point myself. The battery is phenomenally complex, and it's extremely difficult to fix. You can't just replace a part like you can on an engine. Yes, you might be able to replace a module or something like that, but that is going to be way more expensive than replacing a spark plug in an engine. So this myth of simplicity is just blown out of the water. So we all knew that this was going to happen in the UK. Ed Miliband's crazy, well, it wasn't Ed Miliband's crazy policies, it's actually the previous government's crazy policies to try and enforce and mandate EVs by 2030 has required a 22% sale percentage of EVs in this year, 2024. They're never going to make that. It's up to about 18%, I think. Car manufacturers are closing factories now. They're not importing cars, internal combustion engine cars, into the UK in order to artificially skew that percentage. And it's just all falling apart, basically. And so the inevitable has happened. Labour is going to water down the electric vehicle targets amid car maker pressure. Electric vehicle targets are set to be watered down by Labour to allow the sale of hybrid models until 2035, amid growing pressure from car makers. Ministers are weighing up what types of cars manufacturers will be permitted to sell after a 2030 ban on new petrol and diesel vehicles comes into force. Former Transport Secretary Louise Hay, who resigned yesterday, was reportedly open to allowing the sale of fully hybrid Toyota Prius-style vehicles, which drives on both a normal engine as well as a battery, until 2035. Her departure will not change that view, it is believed. This would mean effectively adopting plans first introduced in 2020 by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and would represent a climb down on Labour's ambitious green vehicle plans. Well, the ambitious green vehicle plans will put the entire UK automotive industry out of business. So something had to give. If you've ever wondered how they managed to keep this green blob going, it's because they fudge the figures to make green energy seem like it's cheaper than regular fossil fueled or nuclear or anything. Quite frankly, they say wind and solar is the cheap. Well, it isn't. And this is a great expose of how they fudge the figures to make green energy seem cheaper than regular energy. Miliband's green energy plans only artificially cheaper than nuclear or gas. What a surprise. Ed Miliband's plans for green energy are based on assumptions that make them appear artificially cheaper than nuclear or gas, according to critics. The Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, DESNZ, has admitted that their estimates for the energy capacity of offshore wind farms in an official report on energy costs rest on the assumption that they operate at their technical maximum, which we know they never ever do. They have a power factor, or whatever you call it, an operating factor of like 30%. That's the amount of energy that you actually get out on average compared to its rated capacity. The admission was made by a senior department official in a letter to Gordon Hughes, Emeritus Professor at Edinburgh University, and Andrew Montford, Director of the campaign group Net Zero Watch, which you must subscribe to. Their newsletters, by the way, because they are fantastic. Professor Hughes and Mr. Montfort wrote to the DESNZ Permanent Secretary to question why one of the department's major reports into energy costs relies on a series of assumptions. They say this includes the assumption that an offshore wind farm will deliver an average of at least 61% of its capacity each year by 2025, the so-called load factor or capacity factor, which rises to 69% over the next decade. In response, a DESNZ official explained that it is standard practice when you're fudging green figures for such estimates to be calculated assuming that they operate at their technical maximum in order to enable comparison across technology classes. That's absolute BS, isn't it? It's such an unfair comparison because a gas plant or a nuclear plant can operate at 100% all the time. However, critics have said that using such a figure for offshore wind farms could lead to an underestimation of the true costs to consumers of green energy. Well, who'da thunk it? Ridiculous. It's all a fudge. The whole thing is a complete fudge. Because if they actually compared like for like, it would be so obvious that wind and solar is vastly more expensive than any other form of energy. Scandalous. So 2nd of December is the big day, so that will be probably early Tuesday the 3rd of December here in Australia, when the big fated Jaguar EV will be released in Miami at some kind of fashion festival or some BS. I've no idea. Anyway, along with transitioning their entire model lineup to vastly expensive EVs that nobody will buy, they are cutting ties with 75% of their dealers. See you later. Jaguar is taking drastic action as part of its transformation. Boosted reports that the brand is cutting 75% of its dealers in England, leaving only a select few in business. The decision is part of Jaguar's plan to reinvent itself as a bankrupt company by 2026. By then, the company aims to sell only electric cars targeting customers willing to pay at least $1 million for a vehicle that's not $1 million or pounds or anything like that. This article comes from a Danish magazine, so it's krona. So divide that by 10 and you've got about, $100,000, which is still a shed load of money. We are reducing our footprint significantly, said Rawdon Glover, Jaguar's managing director, in an interview with Car Dealer magazine. Well, it makes sense really, because they won't have any sales, so they won't need any dealers. Brilliant. So as well as auto manufacturers going out of business in the UK, all the supply chain for those auto manufacturers are also feeling the pinch, because engine components, transmission components like clutches and gearboxes are also not required for EVs. So here's another German car supplier axing hundreds of UK jobs amid switch to EVs. Schaeffler will close its plant in Sheffield as demand for clutches slumps. A German supplier of clutches is preparing to cut hundreds of jobs in Sheffield as the industry shifts towards electric cars, which don't have clutches. Schaeffler, which is headquartered in Bavaria, said it would cut 4,700 jobs across Europe and shutter the UK plant. The closure is expected to affect around 200 jobs, subject to consultation, the Telegraph understands. The Sheffield factory builds clutches for manual passenger cars and tractors. However, a global shift towards electric vehicles, EVs, and automatic transmission has led to sinking demand. Declining global demand for clutches is leading to production overcapacity, the company said. Schaeffler therefore plans to discontinue this operation. So you should all go out and buy manual cars. If you can't drive a stick shift, learn to do it. Drive a manual car. They're brilliant. But seriously, this is just a disaster when you've got an entire supply chain dependent on the auto manufacturing industry. If you cut off the consumer of those products, the suppliers just go under as well. And in another sign that EV demand is just not there, Fiat 500e production paused again. 2 Maserati models will also be out of commission for a whole month. They have to shut down the production lines because there's just not enough demand to get the cars off the dealers' lots. Oh, here we go again. Stellantis has no other option but to pause production of the Fiat 500e. Demand for the electric city car continues to be poor, forcing another hiatus at the Mirafiori plant. The Italian factory suspended output several times this year, and it's about to do it once more after telling unions that operations would be suspended from December 18 until January 5th. It's now adding the December 2 to 17 interval to the stoppage. Consequently, the Fiat 500e will not be assembled from Monday, December the 2nd, until Sunday, January the 5th, 2025. It's not just the diminutive hatchback impacted by the low demand, as Maserati is facing an identical problem. Production of the Gran Turismo and Gran Cabrio will also be halted during the interval. Through the voice of Stellantis' head honcho Carlos Tavares, the exotic brand recently blamed bad marketing for sluggish sales. I mean, I'm not sure whether they're referring to EVs or not, but seriously, who would buy an EV Maserati? You buy a Maserati for one reason, and that's the engine. The rest of it just comes free, as Enzo Ferrari once said. You buy the engine, the car comes free. So why you'd buy an electric Maserati, I don't know, answers in the comments. And again, this is the car manufacturers, they're struggling, I know, but they get it back to front. They call for incentives to buy electric cars, but what they should be doing is telling the government to cut the mandates. You can't force people, you can lead a horse to water, etc. But it's not about throwing more money at the problem. Ford calls for incentives to buy electric cars as backlash grows. Ford UK has called on the government to introduce incentives to encourage drivers to buy electric vehicles as an industry backlash grows over sales targets. Lisa Brankin, Ford UK's chair and managing director, told the BBC that without demand, a government mandate to produce and sell more EVs just doesn't work. Correct, Amundo. The comments add to a growing row between the government and the industry over the sale of new petrol and diesel cars being phased out over the next few years. On Tuesday, Stellantis, the owner of Vauxhall, said it would close a plant in Luton, putting 1,100 jobs at risk, partly due to the EV targets. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds told the House of Commons on Wednesday that Stellantis' decision was a dark day for Luton. Yes, it was indeed. It's a dark day for the UK, it's a dark day for the British auto industry, and it's a dark day for the population, of whom I used to be one. But I'm very glad I'm in Australia now, quite frankly. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. Really hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye for now.